The term little black dress did not exist when Chanel's new creation appeared in Vogue in 1926. No one knew about the existence of such a garment. The first drawing was published in an American issue in October, followed by a French one in November. It depicted a form-fitting dress made of black crêpe de chine just below the knee, with long, tight sleeves and a boat neckline. The front was loose, and the sides had a bolero cut, while the back closely embraced the hips. The dress was simple, without decorations, featuring 4 narrow pleats. "Simplicity of lines," said the headline of the French issue. The American edition enthusiastically predicted that this dress would be worn by the whole world. However, it was hard to believe at the time. The dress was compared to a car. According to Vogue, it was the Ford of Chanel, and this comparison stuck. Did the American mind reject the idea of having the same car as their neighbor? The enormous success of the Ford Model T, the car that put America on wheels, proved that it did not. Chanel's unique black dress was destined to become a sort of uniform, a democratic garment that stripped fashion of its detachment from real life. Vogue's predictions turned out to be prophetic. Emboldened by the success of the jersey suit, Gabrielle Chanel continued to simplify clothing, removing unnecessary details for the convenience of her contemporaries. Perhaps the time was approaching when Haute Couture, which had created something like splendid poverty, would fear its own creations, predicted the insightful Colette. Chanel did what was necessary. Her dresses did not overshadow women. In them, the women were not hidden. A man could now admire his wife's beauty rather than dress her like a doll to show off his wealth. The suffering required to wear a fancy dress was a thing of the past. Women chose a new, simplified style of dress. Day wear, surprisingly, became uniform, as writer Marcel Proust noted. A duchess, an actress, a typist, and a tired housewife all desired to look the same. Appearance ceased to be a marker of class affiliation. Now, clothing reflected women's needs and desires, not their social standing. Women wanted to wear clothing that was simple and comfortable. Practicality took precedence over ornamentation, laying the foundation for the modern approach to clothing, which in the 1920s was most vividly reflected in Chanel's work. The emancipation of the so-called weaker sex continued after the end of World War I. Women had to replace men in the workforce and gain independence, something they may not have actively sought, but from which, for obvious reasons, they would never again withdraw. They were doing their job perfectly well, so why should the order issued by the Ministry of War, granting them the right to hold positions like accountants and other clerks, be revoked? Why should men take away their newfound social status? Feminism, based on gender equality, gained momentum, bringing forth a new type of woman, the Garçonne, a spinster or emancipated girl, as they would come to be called. The term gained widespread popularity after the publication of Victor Marguerite's novel, La Garçonne. Its release in 1922 shocked society. The novel's heroine, unmarried Monica L'Herbier, a wealthy heiress, decides to seek her own happiness, regardless of her parents or her unreliable fiancé, Lucien. This energetic woman wants to be free, to control her own body, and to explore her sexuality with numerous partners. The novel caused a scandal in a country devastated by war, which certainly did not need women absorbing harmful ideas. The punishment for the obscene scenes in the novel was the removal of the Honorary Legion Award. But when the book became a bestseller, and its heroine a symbol of emancipation for all women, the term even made it into the dictionary, where garçonne was defined as a young woman leading an independent life. This definition suited Chanel perfectly. No wonder the staff called her Mademoiselle like Monica L'Herbier. When Boy died in 1919, Chanel lost the person who had been everything to her. Father, mother, nanny, brother, friend, lover. After him, she had other lovers. Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, poet Pierre Reverdy, Duke of Westminster. But none of them meant as much to her as Boy. I was his property, and he knew it, she said. She never again took money from men. Thanks to her work, her model house, and her fashion empire, she became a duchess in the dictionary sense of the word, a young woman leading an independent life. And she looked the part. Slender, with a mass of black hair under a small hat, she resembled a charming street urchin and deliberately emphasized this with her manner of dressing. The straight lines of her dresses, blouses, hid the curves of her waist and the fullness of her breasts. Beauty standards changed, and voluptuous forms went out of fashion, giving way to admiration for the androgynous look. However, androgyny did not negate femininity, as Chanel herself clearly demonstrated. She once again caught the right moment to assert her style in the fashion world. She had an enormous number of clients, and many women from less affluent backgrounds longed to resemble Chanel with her understated simplicity and freedom in dress. Rather than fighting those who copied her style, Chanel embraced it. Yes, it's true. My models are often copied, but I don't worry or complain. Why should I prevent it? Just think of the publicity it gives me. The women I dress don't care about the imitators. There wouldn't be any voluntary helpers, my copycats, if not for that. This way, model number 817 from the winter collection of 1926 became popular in business circles. The little black dress was a chic wardrobe item, although at first glance, it might not have seemed so. First of all, it was short, and just recently, during the Belle Époque, suffragette Hubertine Auclair had unsuccessfully fought for shorter dresses as a symbol of women's emancipation. In 1924, 10 years after Auclair's death, her dream was fulfilled, and dresses began to shorten. Women took up sports. They grew proud of their bodies and started revealing more and more of their legs. The trend solidified, and a few years later, skirts became even shorter, just covering the knees, as did hairstyles. The new trend was reflected in the works of many designers, but Chanel's form-fitting dress became a landmark in fashion history precisely because of its black color. Chanel herself had been wearing black since around 1910, and for her workshops on Convent Street, it was nothing new. For me, no one would dare to dress in black, Chanel claimed. This is true. For the era in the fashion circles Chanel moved in, where her clothes were worn. However, fashion history tells a different story. For example, Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, to emphasize his grandeur, chose dark, restrained suits, beside which the bright, shiny garments of other European monarchs looked outdated. Having established himself in Spain, this strict style found admirers beyond its borders. French King Henry II almost always dressed in black, and after his death, his wife, the stern Catherine de' Medici, stunned the people with her black mourning gown. Until the 16th century, black was the color of mourning for French kings. For this, Catherine earned the nickname the Black Queen. Chanel wasn't particularly interested in the history of costumes, but she acknowledged that she admired the austere fashion of Catherine's era. From Louis V to the Directory of 15, fashion underwent many elegant tricks and tasteless innovations. But how much strength, how much character, of iron control and authority was there in the women's fashion of the 16th century, Chanel said. As a symbol of power and virtue, black was the prerogative of the elite. Funerals were expensive, and black clothing was considered a luxury until the Industrial Revolution made it affordable, and it became a common item in the wardrobes of urban women. Perhaps the wealthy fashionistas didn't like this, but it suited the rebel Chanel, who resisted official fashion and its embellishments. Instead of pastel tones and bright color palettes, she instinctively turned to black, the restrained noble color worn by nuns in the convent of Aubazine. The experience of living in a convent where her father had sent her with two sisters after her mother's death left a mark on Chanel's taste, and it was in this monastic environment that her harsh views on beauty were formed. "Nothing ages a woman like rich clothing," she once said. When Boy left her, she found solace in black, which forever became her trademark, and as it always happened, what she wore, she successfully sold. Her first bold step to fame was the jersey suit, and the next was the black dress. Ironically, Chanel once again imposed her modest style on fabulously wealthy women. She found a way to cope with the grief and humiliation she had experienced in her youth when she was raised in the convent school of the Virgin Mary in Moulins, learning alongside girls from wealthy families in her poor clothes. But if her austere dress became something like a convent uniform, this time she chose it herself, by her own will, despite her wealth. "They say she's very rich," wrote Colette. "In her, there's nothing of the contagious glistening gold of trinkets, that vulgar shine that comes from pitiful people weighed down with earthly possessions." After World War I, Paul Poiret, Chanel's rival, was baffled and could not understand how the refined art of haute couture could tolerate the bold slogan, "Less is more." He wrote that women were dressing like orphans in uniform dresses. However, despite his outrage and attempts to create more elaborate collections inspired by the past, the fact remained. Neither his colleagues nor his clients were interested in him anymore. In a country experiencing a serious economic crisis, showing off one's wealth was considered improper. Awaiting the results of the tough measures taken by President Poiret, people tried not to display their riches, and women universally wore black dresses, a paradoxical garment that proved simplicity was not synonymous with poverty. However, Chanel's little black dress not only served as a symbol of collective austerity, but also perfectly matched the avant-garde aesthetics of the time. Like Kazimir Malevich, who called for the shedding of the rough skin of centuries in order to catch up with us, Chanel also proposed something radical, an incredibly simple black dress. This style later influenced interior design, blending not only with abstract art, but also with the modernist architecture of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus, and Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier referred to the house as a machine for living and embodied this idea in the Citroën House project, a prototype of mass housing presented at the 1922 Autumn Salon. Le Corbusier created the concept of the house, while Chanel created the concept of clothing. The work of the architect of the Citroën House resonated with the work of the designer who invented the Ford dress. This was the period of the rise of Art Deco, a movement that began before the war, but fully asserted itself at the International Exhibition of Decorative Arts and Modern Industry, which opened in Paris in 1925. Chanel's designs were showcased in the Pavilion of Elegance alongside works by Lanvin, Pateau, Louisa Boulanger, and others, intentionally moving away from the soft forms and pastel hues of the Art Nouveau style. Art Deco proposed symmetry of lines and forms inspired by the geometry of Cubism and Constructivism. Chanel had to support this direction. But wasn't it she who made every effort to eradicate the excesses of the Belle Époque, down to the last ruffle? The victim of any adornments in favor of natural contours, created by unpretentious and strict fabrics, she brought a modernist spirit to fashion, aligning it with the spirit of Art Deco and laying the foundations for contemporary style. Clothing became a uniform line of designer models so well thought out that they could be mass-produced to meet the demand of the widest clientele. This is exactly what Vogue magazine wrote about in 1926. The strict little black dress, the archetype of 1920s fashion, was destined for a long life, demonstrating the foresight of its creator. This garment was extremely versatile, and thus it was untouched by the relentless passage of time. The little black dress became an integral part of the female wardrobe, as Christian Dior famously said. However, he followed a set of rules completely different from Chanel's. In Dior's collections, there was no dress that tightly cinched at the waist and cascaded into wide pleats. It took no less than 26 meters of wool fabric to create, and it weighed more than 3 kilograms. Yet, it was still called a little black dress. Karl Lagerfeld, who worked at Balmain at the time, created his first little black dresses in the 1950s for a line that anticipated the rise of ready-to-wear fashion. These were called dresses for the best. However, exquisite dresses for formal evenings inevitably became a sort of rarity. For an early evening party, the little black dress was quite suitable. Chanel herself once again turned to the contradictory combination of modesty and chic. After a long break from creating, from 1939 to 1954, she began to create a series of light, flowing models, often supplemented with transparent chiffons and shawls, which remained in her collections until her final summer collection of 1971. The little black dress was not very popular in the 1960s and completely fell out of fashion in the 1970s, but it proved to be resilient and returned to fashion. A new generation of designers, with a strong emphasis on custom tailoring, such as Elia, Mugler, and Claude Montana, soon released their own versions, and the little black dress, like a queen among clumsy schoolgirls, swept aside all the new trends in street fashion and neon colors of the 1980s. Karl Lagerfeld was well acquainted with the little black dress. When he began working for Chanel, it became an important part of his collections and the rhythm of his fashion shows. Karl could create an authentic Ford dress with his eyes closed. He always gave it a personal touch, whether with embroidery or not, knee length or mini, with additional details or in a minimalist style, skillfully bringing the image of the classic dress into the new century. Between the Ford 2000 model and the 1926 version, 4 generations of women wore the little black dress, demonstrating that the spiritual legacy of Chanel truly stayed with us.